here's your quarterback. Here's all the concepts they're really strong on. Here's all the concepts they're weak on. Here's the plays that if you were to call them, they may mess up the like mental side of it. That was usually where the light bulb went off. And they're like, oh my gosh, I thought that they, one example, like I totally thought that my quarterback knew the difference between cover 2 and Tampa 2, but it seems like he's actually getting it wrong half the time. He's just guessing. That's a really interesting insight to give to a coach 3 weeks before the game, as opposed to, we had one customer we were working with, and they realized that their quarterback had thrown 3 interceptions in the first half of their first game of the season because he didn't understand a pretty basic coverage that in our system they would have caught. And so that was actually Michigan in the national championship. They kind of credited some of the insights that they got from Ethos with in this case, it was the defense. They got an interception in the national championship game. And they're like, yeah, like I don't think that safety would have known to make that move had we not drilled it within Ethos. And so that's the kind of key idea, is if you can get really sharp about what do people really need to know, and then how can you know, not just hope, like really know based on data that they actually do know that, and they're going to make the right decision, 99.9% of the time when they see it. We think that's kind of what separates the truly elite teams from the more average teams.
What if the biggest advantage in sports wasn't physical? It was just making sure your players actually know the playbook. That's the question a couple of guys were trying to solve for from their dorm room at UNC. The answer became Ethos. Andrew Powell is the CEO and co-founder of Ethos, a human readiness platform that started by reinventing how athletes learn playbooks, game plans, and scouting reports. Think Duolingo for football. The company now works with Super Bowl champions, NCAA powerhouses, the US men's hockey team, and has even expanded beyond sports into military clients. In this episode, we get into why the mental side of sport is still so underserved and underinvested compared to the physical side, how Ethos helped the Seattle Seahawks in their Super Bowl run, and how the same platform shifts from NFL sidelines to fighter pilot training. Here's my conversation with Andrew Powell, CEO and co-founder of Ethos. Andrew, I love hearing from founders, especially when the story is like, me and my co-founder were in a dorm room and we came up with this idea. The other version of that is being in a bar and writing on a bar napkin, a cocktail napkin, of course, but yours may be a bit different. Can you walk me through the origin story of Ethos, the company that you founded, and why exactly you decided to tackle that problem?
Yeah, so co-founded Ethos with Sasha. He and I were college roommates, and he actually played on the basketball team in North Carolina. We were both huge sports fans. I was really interested in the science of learning and how AI and technology would transform how people learn, and saw an opportunity to apply all of that to the sports world through essentially reinventing how teams learn playbooks, game plans, scouting reports, all the mental parts of the game. You can kind of imagine the first version of our product was similar to Duolingo, but for learning sports plays. So you see, instead of just looking at a static playbook that was, maybe a bunch of diagrams of plays, you would have a video and then a matching question. And then it would ask you if the, ball side wing goes towards the basket, then how are we going to defend that? What's going to be our check? And it gives kind of a gamified, engaging learning experience. Yeah, we were just buddies at UNC and went and pitched the UNC basketball program and the UNC football program. They liked it. And then that was kind of the, genesis of Ethos, which now has grown to actually go beyond sports. We serve the Department of Defense. We serve a lot of high performance enterprise clients, and have really advanced the product a ton to, serve customers across a whole bunch of different sports and use cases beyond just kind of the basic playbook learning. But yeah, it was a couple kids who were interested in sports, interested in tech, who had a dream and kind of have been on that journey ever since.
I find that specific use case really interesting because as the modern athlete gets bombarded with data, all they want is like, what are the X's and O's? Like, I don't know how to contextualize all of this.
Yeah.
How do I filter through it? And not just the athlete, the
Right.
coach themselves, right? And that translation from data and into what we, even the term actionable insights almost feels a bit alien to an athlete. Like, stop using buzzwords. Tell me where I need to stand.
Yeah.
What do I need to do? It's that kind of thing. And it sounds like that's kind of the space, is that translator between this reams of data that we're collecting into, hey, that's the playbook. And I mean, obviously convert that into playbook is what you're doing, and then onto the field of play. So it's how much of that process are you involved in? Is it, I mean, I'm not saying that you're involved in the data analytics part, but once it gets to the playbook, actually translating just that to the athlete, is there's just that space? That's all
So
you're
we
interested in?
started out really focused on that. My background was learning science and had kind of pioneered some techniques that could drive much faster adoption of new knowledge and much better validation of ensuring people have the actual skills to perform. And that I'd actually done a bunch of academic research in college classes to see if you implemented these techniques, what was the impact on student learning outcomes or passing rates. And some of the studies were so profound, they even got written up in the New York Times. I worked with a Econ 101 professor and dramatically improved the learning outcomes in that class. And then interestingly, I was like, I think that these same methodologies that are working in college classrooms could apply to a lot of other settings. And the really interesting thing about sports is unlike a university classroom, like whether your players know what they're supposed to do and do it really well on game day is broadcast in front of millions of people. And if you don't do it well, you get fired. And so as soon as we kind of went to the football program, it was back, Coach Fedora was the coach at the time. And I was like, hey, we've shown that we can have people learn things twice as quickly and make about, half the mental errors that they made in the past. Like, what do you think that would mean for your program if like a new freshman coming in masters the playbook week 1 as opposed to maybe week 6? Or if you know in advance the like 5 key mental errors that might happen that lead to a blown coverage or a missed assignment on a play, like what if you could reduce that to only 2 a game? And so he got really excited by the concept, and then we showed him the kind of prototype of, all right, here's what the learning experience would be for players. This would be much more engaging for players than currently. A lot of people had maybe a Huddle video stream or DV Sport or Exos, and then perhaps there was a teamwork site where they were hosting some of the playbook materials or whatever else. But it wasn't this integrated, highly engaging, data-driven learning experience that's really good for the players. But then I think the aha moment often happened, to your point about the analysis and sort of data-driven insights. Once a offensive coordinator or a position coach saw the data that we were able to give them about a player, which would basically visualize like, okay, here's your quarterback. Here's all the concepts they're really strong on. Here's all the concepts they're weak on. Here's the plays that if you were to call them, they may mess up the like mental side of it. That was usually where the light bulb went off. And they're like, oh my gosh, I thought that they, one example, like I totally thought that my quarterback knew the difference between cover 2 and Tampa 2, but it seems like he's actually getting it wrong half the time. He's just guessing. That's a really interesting insight to give to a coach 3 weeks before the game, as opposed to, we had one customer we were working with, and they realized that their quarterback had thrown 3 interceptions in the first half of their first game of the season because he didn't understand a pretty basic coverage that in our system they would have caught. And so that was actually Michigan in the national championship. They kind of credited some of the insights that they got from Ethos with in this case, it was the defense. They got an interception in the national championship game. And they're like, yeah, like I don't think that safety would have known to make that move had we not drilled it within Ethos. And so that's the kind of key idea, is if you can get really sharp about what do people really need to know, and then how can you know, not just hope, like really know based on data that they actually do know that and they're going to make the right decision 99.9% of the time when they see it. We think that's kind of what separates the truly elite teams from the more average teams.
And I think that's almost more powerful than any data that you can provide, because it's not about how much data there is, it's about how much data goes in and stays in. And that's
Totally.
actually what you're measuring. And based of that, then a coach or a team or whatever it is can decide, hey, with this level of confidence, we know what plays to call because we know those they've got nailed. And of course, things can still go wrong, but all I'm doing is adjusting the probability. That's where we live, right? And especially in the world of sport, as the world of sport gets more and more zeros and more dollars into it, it's these fine margins that can make all the difference.
Yeah, I think it's been really cool working with some of our customers because like they're the sharpest sports minds in the world. Like having the opportunity, to support, for example, we worked with the Seattle Seahawks this past year in their Super Bowl run. And like Mike McDonald is like probably the, one of the best defensive minds in the game, and just unbelievable coach, unbelievably sharp. But I think what he kind of realized is like he's got a whole career worth of expertise that is extremely nuanced about how to stop every different offensive scheme. But like ultimately that doesn't matter if that doesn't get into the heads of the players. The players are the ones who have to execute. And some of them are, multi-year veterans who are absolute PhDs in kind of defensive schemes. Some of them are totally new to the squad and they need to learn it all in training camp and they need to master it over the summer. And so if you can get more players to operate on the field as if they have all of the expertise of the coaching staff, and I think that's kind of what our platform helps to bridge is essentially extract all that expertise and knowledge from the coach, get it into the heads of the players, and then validate on a weekly basis, hey, are they really, really up to snuff with everything that they need to know for this particular opponent? We've added some interesting innovations with AI of like, okay, here's your basic playbook, but what are the schemes of the opponent that you're facing? So like as the Seahawks were prepping for the Patriots, like the points of emphasis are actually different week over week because, for one team, you really need to be, down really strong on how you deal with certain motions or certain pre-snap reads. For another team, it might be a totally different scheme that you really need to be mastering. So even what knowledge is very important for a player to be very sharp on changes week over week, and makes it just really dynamic. But yeah, you're exactly right that it's like if, I sometimes chuckle. I think that football coaches are some of the hardest working people in the world. They spend so much time analyzing film and looking for tendencies and understanding, the ways that they might get some sort of small advantage. But then sometimes we'll enter in and they'll spend like 95% of the time looking for those insights and only 5% making sure that the players actually understand all the insights. And it's like, hey, let's actually flip this. Or if you can use AI to help uncover some of those insights and then use a product like ours to drive efficiencies in making sure they're operational, like that's a better use of time because, it'd be great if like every single quarterback had the expertise of Tom Brady, but like you really got to work on the mental development and the pattern recognition and the split second decision making of every possible situation you might find. Like that's what separates, the greatest of all time from a rookie that's struggling to pick up the pace of the game.
And that cognitive development is, again, such a topic that we're seeing a lot of interest in. I mean, one side
Yeah.
is skill acquisition, which is actually the physical attributes. Hey, can I become stronger, faster, etc. But then there's also an element of
Right.
cognitive development of being stronger, faster up here. But I think that memory and learning element is a bit underplayed, and that's little niches where you're sitting, which I find fascinating. By the way, the use case that you mentioned also I hadn't even thought of, but of course it makes total sense. Where I'm not just learning my playbook, I can learn my opponent, so as much data as I get about it. That's an interesting use case. And you've mentioned a bunch of names that you're already working with. Sounds like you're quite heavy in collegiate football as well as the NFL, and of course your origins are in basketball. Are those the two main sports that you're functioning in? Maybe there are some other use cases that you can talk about, just to speak to the breadth that
for sure.
Ethos is
So
operating in.
Started out in college, basketball and football. Those have been great use cases for us. We've expanded into NFL. So it's kind of some of the notable ones, the Seahawks Super Bowl champions this year, the LA Rams, when they won the Super Bowl a couple years ago, our customers then as well. Their general manager actually had a great quote that's like the next frontier of football is understanding the mind and how you can teach and test most effectively. Which I thought was really sharp and just resonates a lot with our beliefs. We worked with Mike Sullivan, the coach of the U.S. Olympic hockey team. That was another really interesting use case where you're trying to pull a ton of people together to understand, a unified scheme in a very tight period of time. So the sort of benefit of getting everyone on the same playbook very, very quickly when you're trying to prepare for the Olympics was really interesting. He's an incredible leader and just really sharp teacher. And so have loved working with him. But to your point earlier of like the difference between some of the complexity cognitively versus more of the physical technique. We've experimented with some other sports, but for example, like golf, we haven't really gotten any traction there because I think a lot of times, yes, there's the cognitive elements of how to decide which shot to hit and what's the right, decision in a certain situation. But so much of it is about just like physical repetition of can you actually execute that shot versus, a football playbook might have 400 plays with like, dozens of different permutations that could be called on each play. And if you listen to like a Sean McVay play call, it like sounds like a foreign language. It's probably 15 words long where every single word means something. And it's even just like memorizing and understanding what it is that he means is like a very challenging cognitive burden. So that's something that we kind of help to translate for teams. But I think that's where we resonate the most is when there's a lot of mental information that people like really need to know. They need to be able to execute it very well. And if they do that better than their opponents, then they get a significant advantage that translates to better execution on the field, fewer blown plays, and then ultimately better chance of winning.
I'll agree with Coach, but I'll expand that. I don't think the development of the brain and the mind is only important for football. I think this is the age that's happening for the human condition, right? This is the age of like how much better and smarter can we get about our own mind and about our own learning. You talk about yourself as a human readiness platform. Also, you alluded to this earlier. You're not only operating in sports, right? And I think that's part of the rebrand as well, because you were known as Learn to Win, and now you're known as Ethos, human readiness, rather than just being niche in sports and the applications in military and elsewhere. Can you talk about that a bit? Because I find that, again, we hear this a lot in sports, that there's some natural crossover, especially when it comes to the military, like smart textiles, computer vision based stuff. And this one, again, seems like a very obvious crossover. And you've already clearly found some traction in crossover into serving the armed forces.
We've been talking mostly about sports. I know that's a lot of what your audience and kind of podcast is focused on. But at this point, actually, most of our business is with the U.S. Department of Defense. So we, after we had proven our success with NFL teams, we got approached by an organization actually in the Air Force, the Air Combat Command, basically all the fighter pilots and fighter squadrons across the Air Force, that said, hey, we're trying to train our combat aviators more effectively, faster. Technology's changing what it looks like to be a pilot. And so we tried to translate basically what we've been doing with NFL teams to a fighter wing, and we found that it translated really well. So instead of training on, playbooks, game plans, scouting reports, it's essentially what are air combat tactics, what are emergency procedures, what are dogfighting situational techniques that, depending on what the opponent does, how do you respond? So it was kind of almost like a football playbook in the sky, or basketball plays in 2-versus-2 dogfighting situations. So that was really cool. And as we got more into the work with the DoD, we found there's a lot of similarities with sports. I think one of the really interesting ones is in both sports and in military service, people spend probably 95% of their time training and preparing for competition, and they spend maybe only 5% really doing, the mission on the field or the combat mission. And so that's a really interesting element. Both have like a huge emphasis on training. It's obviously very high stakes. I think sometimes sports teams like to think that they're doing life and death things in the military. Obviously, it actually is. And so, the exercise of a special forces unit preparing for a mission, they are the masters of thinking about every possible situation of what could happen. How do we plan for that? How do we adjust for it? And just their level of preparation and drilling and training is unbelievable. So it's been really cool to work with them and to provide value with a tech platform that starts to really give them visibility into the readiness. And that's actually the term readiness itself. I think we all have an intuitive understanding for it. The military has a very specific definition, which is that it is the ability of forces to fight and meet the demands of assigned missions. And so we've kind of taken that to say, it's ability meets mission. So it's not just a training platform. It's not just, everybody went through the training, they've completed the program. They've done everything that they need, and we've measured their skills, and it matches the mission requirements in a way that gives us confidence and evidence that they're going to be able to perform. So that's kind of the same idea that we talked about with the Seahawks of, you can know what Sam Darnold knows from a playbook and knowledge perspective. You then want to apply that to how relevant is that for what he's about to see on Sunday. And that's where the magic happens, is kind of the cross between readiness, or I guess preparation, and mission application. So that's kind of the quick translation there. And then we've got a bunch of commercial clients as well. I think even if it's not the most high stakes thing, a lot of organizations want for their teams to operate with the focus and the urgency and the competitive fire of a team prepping for the Super Bowl, or, a fighter squadron prepping for a combat mission. And so we've got a bunch of sales teams that use the products to train their Salesforce. We've got products teams that use it to really upskill in the world of AI. There's been a ton of demand for how do we sort of retrain our workforce to almost follow the new playbook of a sort of more AI native world. So honestly, I think the applications are pretty endless, since, every organization, training and knowledge and performance matter. And if you can get an edge through taking a better approach than the traditional systems allow, then I think it's valuable.
Before we continue, a quick word from us at Sports Tech X. If you're building, investing, or operating in sports tech, you need to know what's moving in the global ecosystem before anyone else does. Sports Tech X's Intelligence Hub gives you that edge. Over 8,000 companies, investors, events, and programs all in one place. Sign up for free. That's intelligence.xyz. www.sportstechx.com. And be sure to check out the show notes of this episode for a little surprise waiting for you. Now, back to the episode. I think you already addressed kind of my next question, which was exactly that. I mean, let's say learning solutions or learning management platforms have been around, especially in the corporate world, for decades, right? There have been big, large companies that have been built in this space. So while that's a natural application, I think a distinction to make for listeners is a key one, is that kind of the earlier point that you made, that in sports, and especially in the military, it's all about that moment and knowing what to do in that moment. And then all the preparation leads to that. There is one thing, especially in the corporate environments, of course, is performance is a layer and how much you can educate, but also compliance is a layer, right? How much information does everybody in my workforce know? My safety procedures, my compliance with accounting standards, whatever the case may be. But in the world of sports, and especially in the military, it is about, hey, I need to know that they know this as much as they can be best prepared and their readiness score to perform in that moment. In that split second, deal with all the information that they get and react and make that second nature. So if your solution is getting tested in that environment and delivering from the sounds of it, then of course, and the applications to the corporate world and various other areas are quite natural. How much of your business currently is, if you just a very rough split, how much of it is in the military versus sports versus, let's say, the corporates and corporate learning
so
and other
it's
applications?
majority is military, but then there's probably 20% or so that is sports, and about 20% that's kind of various commercial applications, um, and growing quickly across all of it. I think there's tremendous need within the military. I don't know if you followed kind of the U.S. News around this, but they're investing a lot in AI and software and sort of the next generation of capabilities, and we're kind of playing a pivotal role in enabling the people to keep pace with all of the changes around them. And so that's another aspect of readiness, is staying continually updated with, for example, drone and counter drone tactics. Like that's a very fast moving, very high stakes realm. So we see tons of opportunity in defense, but obviously the sports is kind of our origin and roots, and are really proud of the work there. And then there's increasing, I think, corporate demand just from seeing the successes that really high performance teams have had using the product and wanting to apply some of those practices to their own organizations.
Let's go back to, or stay with your roots then, in the world of sports, but take a wider lens. When you're operating in a very specific niche, which is around human readiness and learning and performance and all that. But of course, sports, as you might be seeing it, is growing in a bunch of different areas. From your perspective, what are the areas that most interest you? Whether it might be something that Ethos might do tomorrow, if it's not doing today, or just as an operator within the industry that you're keeping an eye on.
One of the things that I'm really interested in is, and I think somewhat what's made us successful so far, is just the intersection of sports expertise and technological expertise. And I think one of the next frontiers for that is, a lot of folks within football have really embraced the analytics world, but I think there's likely a next evolution of that almost tries to use AI agents to support the workflows of the staff. Like right now, you have strict limitations on how many human coaches you can have, on the staff or on the sideline. AI is making it possible to run so much more analysis, many more probabilistic scenarios, Monte Carlo simulations, all sorts of really sophisticated analysis of historical decision making. And I kind of have this idea of like, could we develop probabilistic models that predict what an opponent is going to run based on historical patterns more accurately than any of the current approaches that are still somewhat based on gut feel in a certain moment. But I think that we're kind of seeing that AI can, when you give it a large data problem, it can come up with some pretty novel solutions in ways that humans don't necessarily expect. So that's what my kind of personal goal for some of our clients this year is, to try to go a little bit beyond just the player readiness, knowledge, and preparation world to perhaps some of these, AI agent workflows to support coaching staffs to do more than they've possibly done. To our earlier point, like a position coach at a college program, I feel like works like investment banking hours, maybe even longer. And I think if we're able to support them to do more in a fraction amount of time, one, it could be a big competitive leverage. But two, I think that, a lot of the manual workflows that they've had to do in the past could easily be automated through AI. So that's one that I'm pretty interested in. I think the other one, I'm very curious about the business of sports, particularly in the States with the college, NIL movement and shifting to more professionalization. I think we're in urgent need of some reforms kind of nationwide to bring some structure to how things are done, but very bullish on sort of the growing market, particularly as athletes are able to monetize in ways that they had been restricted from in the past. So excited about some of the business opportunities that come from that, but probably not something directly that Ethos would be involved in.
I want to stay for a minute on the first point that you made, and not a counter argument, but a thought which is emerging from a casual fan, not, let's say, somebody from the world of sport, is that the over analysis or over analytical nature of sports taking the joy out of sport, or maybe the joy can translate to unpredictability in some way. Do you think there's any credence to that argument to say that, hey, if everybody has this baseline of information and everybody's using very advanced, and I agree with you, by the way, I think that there is a next evolution naturally of where analytics takes us, that it creates a very homogeneous baseline, then everybody's kind of got the same information. So what is the differentiation? Your thought on, is that actually a
Yeah, I
valid
think it's
fear?
possible. I think that I'm probably an optimist around these things and think that if you're able to give some of the best sports minds like superpowers using AI to the genius coach that has a play concept that, maybe installs one of those per week because of just time limitations, if suddenly they can unlock their creative capacity and install like 10 totally new concepts every week, you might lead to even more dynamism through sort of the generative nature of AI. And then I think that there's some very interesting like second order effects of, okay, say that it becomes possible to like upskill a freshman much, much faster than you had in the past. Like, will we start seeing a lot more productive freshmen than we had? Because like conventional was, or even rookies in the NFL, it's like so many rookie quarterbacks come in extremely highly touted and then really struggle year one, and some of that's physical development, some of that's actual practice, but some of it's mental development. And I'm bullish on some of those elements. There probably is some risk of like, if people think, I mean, I'm not deep in NBA statistics, but I definitely think there's a sort of homogenous element of like all the best championship teams seem to kind of run the sort of Golden State Warriors playbook of sorts, which was kind of driven by like statistical analysis of 3-point shots. And so there might be some elements of like people starting to play a certain style and it all looking more or less the same. I don't know. I'm pretty bullish because I think if similar to other industries, like AI can kind of give people superpowers. And I think that if the bottleneck in the past has been like the hours in the day or just how many cut ups of game film can you do or how many new ideas can you test, I'd love to see a Andy Reid with all of his creative play calling, like supercharged with a really great AI assistant that just, makes him even more productive and even more creative in his work.
I'm actually with you on that. I think that I'm more optimistic, but also I think there's enough evidence in the way sport has been played so far across various sports. You mentioned a couple in American football and the NBA, but Formula One, which has arguably been the sport where the most amount of data has been processed, at least in the last 20 years for sure. And yet, even now, no matter how mechanically even you try to make the cars, there is always a space for one crazy designer or an innovator, an Adrian Newey, to go and build out something which will push the boundary, and then everybody's playing catch up. And then that just keeps pushing the sport forward. Yeah, I think there are clearly sports that have already demonstrated that actually improving the baseline creates further headroom in some way, which is, I guess, the case that we're both making. Speaking of headroom, Andrew, looking forward, what does the next 12, 18 months look like for you guys?
We're continuing to grow and kind of taking on new clients. And so anybody in the sports world or business world, I would love to, check out the website. And if you're grappling with any sort of human readiness challenge, or even just how you're going to adopt AI to improve your workforce, like we'd love to chat. And then likely, towards the end of this year, early next year, going out to raise another round of funding, and just tremendous opportunities to go and capture in these sectors, and really excited about continuing to double down on the tech development. Some of the things that we alluded to there of how things become more AI agent driven. How do we give our customers superpowers? But certainly a lot of work to be done also on the military side in thinking about what does the next generation of military readiness look like. So yeah, really excited for the year and excited to see our customers hopefully win national championships and win Super Bowls and go out and crush the competition in the fall.
Those are the perks, right? When you get to actually support a championship win or something, whether you get to be in the arena or not, you said, I played out
Exactly.
a little role in that. Fantastic stuff. A fundraise coming up. It sounds like on everything that comes with it, of course, hiring and expansion in new markets. So Anybody who wants to speak to Andrew, I guess we'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes and can get in touch with you there. Andrew, we started in sports, so I have to end in sports as well, even though you guys do so much more. I always want to know, I like to believe that we're all sports fans first. So as my last question, I always want to know what has been your favorite sporting moment.
So I grew up a huge Auburn football fan. So both my parents went to Auburn. My grandparents, cousins, uncles, like everybody in the family went to Auburn. And my actually 21st birthday was the night of the Auburn, Alabama famous kick six game where Auburn returned a 109-yard field goal back for a touchdown to win. The biggest rivalry in college football, the number 1 versus number 4, I think it was. It was the highest ranked matchup ever. And that happens at like 10 p.m. And then I turned 21 at midnight. And so, it was a unbelievable time. It was probably the craziest college football game ever. And we all like rushed the field and, then celebrated birthday with family and friends. And so the combo of those two things, like that'll be unmatched for me. Just a unbelievable experience to be there in person. And a close second is I went to for undergrad. And then when we beat Duke in the Final Four with Caleb Love hitting an unbelievable 3-point shot with seconds left in the game. That was a incredible moment too. But nothing will beat the Auburn kick six for me as favorite sports memory.
I said live a lifetime. And the only reason I know anything about Auburn is because of Charles Barkley, and he won't stop talking about his alma mater on Inside the NBA. So fair play. Now I didn't know about this particular game, or at least I might have heard it, but didn't realize it. But I will go look up the highlights for sure. Andrew, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Appreciate
Thanks, man. All right, guys, that's a wrap for another episode. See you guys next week. That's a wrap on this episode of the Sports Tech AllStars Podcast. If this conversation gave you something, a new angle, a name to follow, a deal to think about, please share it with someone in your network who needs to hear it. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, a quick rating takes a few seconds and helps more people find the show. If you're not on our weekly newsletter yet, fix that at newsletter.sportstechx.com to join 20,000 other sports business leaders. For deeper intel on sports innovation, investment, and where capital is moving in sports, head to sportstechx.com or follow us on socials, on our LinkedIn. Subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts so that the next conversation finds you. See you in the next one.